So I'm back after my fun bout last week. And I decided what I thought I might do is a problem that occurs a lot of times when people go out and plein air paint, myself included, where you go out and you love the view, you love the vista that you're going to paint, right? But I'll be darned if you're not getting the best lighting, the most dramatic lighting, particularly if you like light and shadow or backlighting or something of that nature. But you don't want to give up on that vista. And I've always felt the more experience you have in painting different kinds of lighting situations and the different kinds of subjects, it rounds you out and makes you a better artist. So I thought I'd paint this. This is actually photo is from my last summer's workshop in northern Italy in the Dolomites, a little village called Alleghe. And right outside of Alleghe, there's this little kind of river that comes into the lake. There's this incredible vista. And we're probably looking somewhat south, I assume, if I got my what do you call it, compass correct. So I'm going to try and make this more interesting and more dramatic than it is by manipulating color and value. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise this. Format's a little bit different. It's 24 by 30. So we're going to raise that a little bit higher than it is there. Probably bring in just a few key marks here. Going to look for that angle, just a simple angle. We're going to look for that angle. It's down. And then it's over. And then and where does this occur? Almost the middle of the page. So I've got that right at the right spot. And we've got another little mountain that interrupts here. We have this beautiful amount of layering. I love layering, specifically when I don't have very, very strong lighting. And there is lighting in this, by the way. I'm not saying there isn't. It's just that the lighting is pretty much up above because it's the middle of the day, and it's off to the left slightly. So I like to keep that in mind. Now, how do I know that? I can look at these little pieces of architecture. Architecture really will give you more of that because it's a very firm object, particularly things like that are square, rectilinear. So we're going to stay with that. Go here, another little layer right here, right there. And then this strong angle cuts in about here, and maybe about here. I'm going to move things around as I paint anyway. There's a lot of trees. That's my shorthand for trees. Piece of architecture right about here. Little piece. But the thing about doing paintings like this, if you can get a little bit of architecture in there, it helps to give scale. Otherwise, you're really not quite sure how big something is. And then we've got a little bit of this creek or river. It's a floodplain. It's kind of a little valley kind of nestled up in here. So we get this kind of zigzag river kind of going here, and about over to here, cutting back, coming down off the page. A little bit of perspective there. And we'll do a little bit of invention back in here too. So that's about all I'm going to lay in terms of information. And if I'm doing plein air work, that's basically what I sketch. I don't, if I'm doing studio work and I want it to be a much more finished painting, different story. And unfortunately, in these instances, I really can't show the studio side of it. So it's really more of kind of the plein air. So it got a little oil here, got a little linseed oil or a little safflower oil out there, a little bit of blue, some white, and some ochre. Not ochre, but Naples. I'm going to get that sky. It's probably a little light. I don't want to go too dark on it. The reason if I go too dark, I have to make this kind of too dark. So I'd rather be, if I'm going to make a little bit of a mistake, I'd rather have that mistake be on the light side. I can always strengthen and darken. And the reason I'm using this brush is it's just quick. It's a great little lay-in brush. I have two blues laid out today. I have a Prussian and an ultramarine. The other colors tend to be standard that I use almost all the time. The only difference is I do have a yellow laid out, and I do have a little bit of a cat orange hue laid out. Not sure if I'm going to need it. Add a little bit more Prussian up in here, just so I get those clouds to stand out a little bit more. And then we'll get the sky down about in here. Oh, that's pretty good. Okay.
Laurel would like to know, how do you start your studio paintings in comparison to what you're doing
That's yeah, I didn't answer that, did I? I spend longer. The main thing is I spend longer in the analyzation process and the drawing. I will be a lot more accurate with my drawing. A little bit less, but I'll paint the same way. Once I have my drawing down, I don't really vary the way I approach painting it. I really paint pretty much the same way with kind of, you know, I've seen people that are like this. And I'm not, that's not me. It may be certain kinds of artists. I'm much more of a get it in there and then fix it if it's wrong. Not that you've heard me say that before, but that's literally how I approach everything. Now, my approach, and I'm going to answer as many questions as I can here, but my approach in painting a landscape and painting a figure is a little bit different. Where if I'm painting a figure, and it depends, by figure, I can break it down into figure or portrait. I will spend longer in the drawing. That's the main thing. And on a portrait, I will spend a lot longer on the drawing and make sure I have everything where I need it. Pretty much in the right spot. Just simply because in portraiture, it's much more crucial, obviously, that you get the likeness. Where a figure painting, I might be a little bit freer on my drawing and change and do whatever I feel I need to do to make the piece a stronger piece. So hopefully that answers the question. But the difference is, and then the last thing that I really should mention that really sets it apart is I have the opportunity to go back and rework. Where in a plein air piece, I really don't have that luxury to be able to go back and rework an area. You know, here I might do it a little bit.
Do you still draw with paint or charcoal or how?
Both. That's, you know, you're asking the kind of questions that I ask my classes a lot. And one of the things that I ask is understand your process, understand your method. And one of the ways you understand your method simply is, how do you start? And I remember asking people that, they go, well, I kind of get a drawing down, but I want to know what do you draw with? Because there are artists that draw with charcoal, there are artists that draw with paint, there are artists that draw with pen, there are artists that draw with graphite. Now, all of which I do work with. I generally, if I'm doing landscape, I generally work with brush. If I'm doing figure, a loose figure, I will work with a brush. A tighter figure, I will probably work with a little more charcoal. In doing a Venetian painting, for example, with all that heavy architecture, I will more likely work with charcoal.
And can you talk about the way you hold the brush?
The way I hold the brush?
Based on what you're doing now.
It doesn't matter what I'm doing. I always start holding the brush like this. Always.
Why?
It's freer. I don't want to get too tight too fast. The minute this I consider energy. So if you break a painting down into a combination of energy and control, which to me, great paintings contain both. So energy is using your arm and being free. See, look at that. Okay, that's because I had turp on it. I literally did that on purpose. That's not a concern whatsoever. So, and then when I want to get more precise, then I'll switch over to say a smaller brush and be a little bit more like that. And if all of a sudden I realize I'm getting too tight, that grip switches and I can use certain areas of the brush and loosen it back up. I'm very concerned. This is a personal thing, but I'm very concerned about how tight or loose my paintings are. That's like I said, that's personal. When I was a fledgling art student, to me, tight was the thing. The difference is, as I was in art school, I was exposed to more and more art, as we pretty much the case in almost. And in being exposed to all the different kinds of art, I all of a sudden discovered a freedom, a looseness of paint where it still looked like it was really real, but there was a freedom, a movement. So when I looked at it close, I felt the paint, and that kind of something that resonated with me. I mean, I recall some of the tight stuff that I used to love too. I remember going to my freshman year of art school in LA. There was an exhibit at Barnesdale Park, and it was an artist who I'd never heard of. One of our teachers said, "Oh, you got to go see this guy. It's really incredible." Historically, he was an illustrator, but it was 70 of this particular artist's paintings. It was Maxfield Parrish. Never heard of the guy, right? All of a sudden I see this stuff and it is like perfection, tight, but not labored tight, just beautiful. And I loved it. I didn't want to do it, but I loved it. And that, I still remember seeing that stuff for the first time thinking, oh my God, how the heck did he, eventually I read more and more about him as I was a student, as to how he proceeded with his glazes and all this. But along the way, I discovered other artists. Now, artists like Sargent had a big influence on me, particularly in figurative work, because his figurative work looked precision until you looked at it close, and then you saw a freedom. And so all that stuff stayed with me, Now, during this time, I was illustrating. I was not painting, but I always painted for myself whenever I'd have time. And my paintings did not look like my illustrations. I used my knowledge and whatever skills I had developed to paint tight, because that was literally when I first started, I wasn't, but as things moved along, it's really what the industry was asking for. And so I said, well, look, as long as I'm going to illustrate, I'm not going to try and turn it into great art. There are artists that did that, but during my period of time, I found I couldn't. Yet there were artists, because I was a much more of a traditionalist than a lot of that art that became extremely trendy. So a lot of the airbrush art. So, I used what I could. I used whatever skills I had to stay vital and develop my career. But I was really much more interested in painting. The reason I knew that is whenever I go to a museum, it would knock me out. We travel to Europe, and when I would see this stuff, it would just flabbergast me. And I knew that's what I eventually wanted to do. I also knew I couldn't afford to right now at that particular time. So, and things have changed. Painting has become, particularly realistic painting, has become much more accepted. When I was in school, it was really more about abstraction and kind of almost how different you could make your work. And it just didn't seem to be, wasn't my cup of tea. I had a few instructors that were doing closer to what I wanted. And I had a couple of friends that literally went out and that's what they strove to do. And they had a big influence on me finally going into painting. And that's John Asaro and Dan McCaw. We're both friends, both colleagues. We were all teaching together. And they came to a Christmas party that I had. Ann and I would throw these elaborate Christmas parties. And both Dan and John showed up, and I had a painting of a guy in a German wine house, one of my own paintings, not an illustration. And both of them gravitated over to it, and they said, "You got to do this. This is you, you can develop a great career doing this." Well, I was a little apprehensive about doing that, but I eventually said, "Hell with it," and ventured out to try and do the kind of art I wanted to. Still searching for that. And one of the things that was said to me when I was first doing this kind of stuff is, and I think it was John said to me, we're talking, I said, John, I said, I actually don't really care what I paint. I just want to paint the way I want to paint and at least find out what that is. And I said, it's kind of a problem because I do have good friends of mine who know exactly what they want to paint. Jim Dietz comes to mind. Jim knew exactly what he wanted to do. Jim knew what he wanted to do when he was a student. I didn't. I just wanted to do art. And so for me, it was a little bit of a different road than it is for some artists.
John Conrad said he used to love our Christmas parties.
What was that?
He loved our Christmas parties.
What about them? I'm sorry, I missed.
Just that he enjoyed them.
Yeah. In fact, John showed up one year with his wife, Jan, and she and Anna were pregnant at the same time and about the same size. I don't know where. Somewhere we have an actual photograph of the two of them belly to belly, which I don't think Anna would probably appreciate, or Jan for that matter.
Yeah, why not? Not to find it.
So we're kind of giving a flavor of what's going on in that background without getting too picky. As I move over here, and I'm just constantly flirting back and forth with 2 or 3 different colors. The blues, the 2 different blues. If it goes too dead, then I add the Prussian. Usually I start with this, which is the, there we go. Let's get, I need to get everything covered. You've probably heard me say this before, but that's one of my goals in the beginning is this lay-in. And that is to get everything covered that needs to be covered, so that I can actually go back and do some work. At this point, it's fill in the empty spaces, which is what I always joke around and say, well, that's all painting is anyway. It's taking all those empty spaces and putting marks in there. Hopefully the marks are correct. That's the hard part though. there's a little bit of warmth to that color. So I added some asphaltum, some white, and some Naples, a little bit more asphaltum. I want to warm it up right up. Now a little bit warmer. Let's throw some cat orange. There we go. And as it goes down, let's get a little bit more of a blue-green kind of down in here. These are colors I see, by the way. I'm not completely inventing colors. I see them. I may be exaggerating them a little bit. Nope, not enough. So I'm throwing more ultramarine. There we go. The freer I can keep it in the beginning and keep some sort of semblance of the imagery that I am painting, the better off I'll be as I move towards finish, because then I can decide I can keep it free and loose, or I can take it to a much more refined state. Most of the time when I'm working on location, that has to do with how far I get. And how far I get has to do with the complexity of what I chose to paint. It also has to do with how many mistakes I make along the way. The more mistakes I make, the longer it's probably going to take, because I'm going to have to do some sort of adjustments to many of those mistakes. So probably a little dark, so I actually lighten it up a little bit here.
So Lael wants, or sorry, Laura,
What's up?
Laura would like to know, do you practice drawing in charcoal or pencil as well as doing your painting so you keep your drawing skills up?
I missed the last part of that. The trail off there.
So that you keep your drawing skills up. Do you practice drawing in charcoal or pencil?
Yep. Charcoal, pencil, and pen.
All of you.
Sometimes graphite, but mainly charcoal. You're right. And a lot of times I'll use, besides charcoal, I'll use 2 or 3 other colors. I'll use like Carbothello type pencils, or what you might consider pastel pencils, types of pencils. So trying to create the busyness without violating the overall feel of light here. Now let's go back to this. So I see some more ochre, and I'm basically working out of the same pot of color, and I'm just augmenting it to fit whatever I'm trying to hit at this particular moment. That's pretty close. That's a little better right there. Sometimes you just lay that brush down and it makes the mark you want. So you don't, you know, I've used this line, and I truly believe it. It's why I don't just use it for fun. Let the brush do the work, don't you? Particularly in the beginning. The brush will, if you use your brush properly, it will make the marks. Sometimes it's just pressing hard, sometimes it's just barely touching it down. But all those different kinds of marks are really what makes your painting interesting. Okay, and then we get over to the okay. Now there's some light, so I'm going to go. Oh, bless you.
Thank you.
I'm going to bring in a new color here. So I'm not working out of the same pot, but that's really what I mean when I say a new color. That kind of color. That's pretty close. It's probably a little stronger than I wanted, but it's value-wise, it's pretty darn close. And it kind of fades a little bit as it moves up, grays out. throw a little bit more orange into it. One other thing is a color, particularly in landscape, is never just a color. It's and that's why there's a line that's used. Always find a way to move warms into your cools and cools into your warms. It means integrate your colors. Okay, let's get this nice dark shape in. So we're going to take asphaltum. We're going to take a little Prussian, a little more asphaltum, because it is pretty warm. That's really, that's much darker than I want. So I'm going to mix that in kind of some of the other colors I already have here. So I mellow it out a little bit. So it's a little, there, that's better. What we want to do, we want to bring this out in front. The looser I can keep that edge, the happier I'm going to be.
Blocking a little bit.
And a lot of that is just literally the way you're pushing one part of the paint in next to the other part of the paint. So if I stand back, it's okay. Up close, not as okay, because it looks like some paint strokes, but in the long run, that's really what I'm after. Okay, I moved to the right. And we want to get those trees against this. Again, there is more architecture. Let me kind of indicate where it goes. I already blew this. It's probably, it's right in here. It's right where I want that. So this is going to come over further. So I'll have to put that building back in there. Again, plein air wise, somebody asked me the difference between studio. Studio, I would be much more careful about painting around that. A lot of times plein air, I won't even worry about that stuff and then put it in later. And you know, it also has to do with the kind of look that you're after. Everybody needs what I call, and I know I'm teaching a couple classes this semester. One of the first things in one of my classes that I'm going to talk a little bit about is what I call intent. And what I mean by that is know what you're trying to achieve. Have a concept in mind of what you're trying to get this thing to look like. Because it's very important. In other words, are you intending it? I want this to be painterly. Some nice thin to thick, some underlying brush work. So you can see my value structure is beginning to set up. Now, on this side, let's bring these trees down, by the way, just so I get some activity in here. So cover some of this. Back in here, this is the other pieces of architecture back. So we'll get those in there. Maybe. I may even leave them out. Who knows? So on the other side, I'm going to take much more ultramarine blue and a little bit of white and keep it a lot more on the blue side because that's the way I see it. Much cooler, much warmer.
How often are you drawing for drawing practice versus your actual painting time?
I'm sorry.
How often are you drawing for drawing practice?
Not as much as I would like to. Mainly because I much prefer drawing models from life. And I just, it loses something when I draw from photo reference. That isn't a very good answer, I'm sorry, but that's literally it. It's, I would like to do more. So I get these interesting edges with this brush easier almost than any other kind of brush. Edges feeling like trees. So it's off, a little bit of an angle coming up. Okay. Down, down. That's about right. Feels about right. Okay. So let's get a little bit of this in. This foreground. There's kind of some great, there's these dark underside, all these trees over in here. And I want it to be warmer. It's going to be right in here. It's going to be right in here. So we're going to have a couple of trees right here. By warm, when I usually say warm, I am adding the asphaltum. Occasionally I might add a little orange or even a little alizarin. Underside trees.
John Conrad was asking if we could show a quick shot of the palette and discuss how you're mixing your
Quick
palette.
shot of the palette. Let's see if I can do this.
Well, I don't know. If we
Yeah, I'm going to just lean it. There's the palette. Hopefully that.
We've
Okay.
tried doing picture in picture of the palette.
Yeah, so I'm going to try and.
Might try to do that.
That looks like it's set back correctly. I try not to mess with the camera too much because I don't know what the heck I'm doing. So my tech support here, Anna, and whoever we have is really helping me out with that. So I want to dwell. I want to get this kind of gray area. So we're going to take a little. I'm going to take a little. Let's put. Yeah, that looks okay.
Maybe discuss how you're mixing colors. That might be helpful.
I'm really only mixing. I have a little spot here where I'm only mixing 2 areas of color right now. That's it. So on my 24 by 24 glass palette, I'm using maybe 8 by 10 inches right now. That's all. Because what happened is all these different colors I'm mixing basically out of almost the same thing, and I'm just changing it. Okay, that's probably about right. And then we've got this one in here, which is going to sit right down kind of in here. Need to place, I call these placeholders. You guys have probably heard me use that phrase before. Simply, that's what they are. I'm trying to get it correctly, but I'm putting it in where I think it belongs. And if it's not correct, I will fix it later. Hopefully, if I have the time. So we're just barely about 30 minutes into it now. So
placeholders in terms of the
placeholder in terms of drawing. So placeholder would be a combination of getting hopefully the right value, pretty close to the right color in the right place.
And Laura would like to know if you think in terms of a mother color.
That's a good question. In this painting, no. In some paintings, yes. There is mother color, meaning a very analogous kind of a palette. So if I'm painting a very backlit scene, then the answer would be absolutely, because your mother color holds all the shadow together. And if it's backlit, that means probably 90% of your painting is in shadow. So your mother color is what holds all those together, and they unify. And then you violate it with the backlight. We're coming. We're getting there. Just going to put some of these little areas in this, and this kind of gray. It's very light, a lot of white, and very gray. So, and you guys know what I use for grays is the combination of the blues and the browns. And then if I need to warm it up, I throw whatever color I need in there. If I need to cool it off, I throw another color. That's a little too light. I don't want to go quite that light that fast. That's better.
Rick would like to know if you treated the board before you began.
Yeah, this time, thanks for asking that question. This time I actually did something different that I've never done before. So I'm working on it. It's covered with acrylic that I've toned. And then this morning, a lot of the times when I've done this on this board, it soaks in that color so fast it flattens out. So I decided to take, I've got a thing of acrylic varnish in a spray can, gloss varnish, and actually coated this, took it outside, sprayed it with a coat of the gloss varnish. Don't always do that, but because of some problems that I was having, I felt like it was appropriate, and the paint is actually going on a little bit better, and I haven't seen any sink in yet. So maybe I learned something. See, if it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't learn so much. You really, by doing these weekly, one of the reasons I even started doing them weekly is because I've been teaching this quick studies course for so long that I got used to doing these quick paintings, and I would challenge myself every now and then to try it larger and larger. Originally, when I first did these quick paintings, I only did figurative work, and eventually I took it to landscape, and then eventually I took it outside and went big on landscape. And I know there's several people who've taken what I call my oversized landscape workshop. Haven't done one for a while, probably do one in August this year. But it's a way of pushing yourself and learning what you can do. And that's, to me, when I'm painting, I just finished a big show. Painting for a big show, I should say. The show actually opens tonight. Any of you in the Charleston area, go. And you know what? If you want to, splurge and buy a couple. But what was I about to say? I was going to say something really mind-boggling that was going to impress you. Forgot what the heck.
About just finishing your show?
No. Oh, I know what. When I paint for a show, I paint with a different concept in mind. I paint with the idea that it's going to be a finished painting, right? Now, sometimes it works against you. You paint a little tighter than you normally would. I try not to. And one of the ways that I hopefully can kind of help overcome that is by working on more than one painting at a time, which I do. I generally work on 4, but I've been known to work on more, and I've been known to work on less. So, but and the reason being is I get it to a certain point. I may or may not have mentioned this. There's another thing about studio painting for me. I realized after about 4 hours, I got to get away from that piece, because I'll mess it up. I guarantee you, if I stay with it any longer. So I'll set it aside, pick up one of my other pieces that I've got going. I'll usually take a day, and my sketch day, and I will sketch up about 4.
So quick question, is that masonite board, or
Is what?
Is the board masonite?
Yes, it is. It's a hardboard, which is masonite.
Yeah.
It's just, they used to only call it masonite, and all of a sudden, boom, it's hardboard.
And then Laurel would like to know, where would you do that large scale workshop?
Large scale?
Mm-hmm.
Usually I do it here in Santa Rosa. I've done it up on the Truckee River before, up in the Squaw Valley area, but generally I do it here in the Santa Rosa area. Not just Santa Rosa, but Sonoma County's got so many great venues. We do everything from going out to the ocean. Usually when I do these large scale, not necessarily, the whole idea is not necessarily to promote my workshops, but what the hell. When I do these large scale workshops, by the way, I'm going to lay some yellow in. We work on 2 locations. It's a 5-day workshop, 2 locations. One location, we go back 2 days in a row. And we usually do the smaller, say, if people that aren't used to it will say 18 by 24, or maybe 24-30. And we do a morning one and an afternoon one. So at the end of 2 days, you've completed 2 paintings. Then the next day, we do 3 paintings. Excuse me, not 3 paintings, 3 days. And that generally is a morning painting and an afternoon painting. And so you get a chance to go back on it 2 or 3 times. Now, you think about that, you're really painting for, I don't know, 3 hours at the most on a painting. So the most you're really getting done on a three session painting is you're getting about 9 hours worth of painting, if that. And I try and work along with you and still come along and see how you're doing. Sometimes people work right by me and see what I'm doing. Sometimes they go off on their own. Doesn't matter to me, but it's fun. And I, by the way, I should mention that I do give out the supplies. I give out the painting surfaces. So the workshop fee includes the painting surfaces. And I usually include 2 or 3 of these large brushes that people can work with.
And a palette.
And a palette. Yeah, that's right. I've been known to make palettes. And I've also been known to let my image fall. So let's stick it back up there. What do you say?
John said it'd be great to do one in Hawaii.
Yes, it would. It's, you know, the key is the cost. And my whole feeling is I'm not trying to get rich off workshops. And I don't want to make it the price so high that only wealthy people can do it. So I want to try and keep that price affordable for as many people as I can. The expensive one that we do obviously is my European one. And that's just because it costs to get over to Europe. But we've been doing these European workshops for, this will be our 13th this June in Amalfi. And we always try and do something different. Every year we try and pick a little bit of a different location. Most of the time in Italy. We've done France. We're looking at France for next year also. Back already. It takes about a year in advance to get these things set up. So let's get a little bit of that water in there just so we get the color. And then we'll go back and we'll start manipulating some things. So we're going to get the pretty blue, piercing blue. This is probably going to be too strong. Yeah, it is. Throwing some more ultramarine into it, just because it's a little more pronounced than I wanted. I wanted a snap, but let's be serious here, come on.
It's kind of blocking.
What's that?
Your arm is blocking. I know it's hard to.
And it gets violet in a few spots too. I can see. I just noticed that. Didn't catch it before, but I'm just beginning. This is something that as you continue to paint, usually what you're doing, and I should talk about this, but as you're painting, you're looking at the big picture initially. Big picture. And it's not until you eventually turn around and start to break things down that you begin to realize all the nuances. You don't want to find those nuances right off the bat. You want those to be there. Very, really, really important. But beginning, I know when I wrote my quick studies book, I came up with this little phrase. I like it. So I like to use it over and over. And I don't always come up with all these phrases. A lot of times they're from other artists or friends, but I came up with this one. And that is, I think it's part of learning to paint is learning to see things in the proper order. So you don't look at the intricacies in the beginning. You look, that happens as the painting progresses. If you look for too many refinements right off the bat, what happens is you lose the big picture. And that, which is a very important part of your painting, is the overall large picture. And that's why this whole thing, I move so from one area to another so rapidly, is because I don't want to lose that big picture. Once I have that done, then I can begin to go back and concentrate on certain areas and go, wait, look at that, I didn't even notice that. And which is absolutely the truth. And that's the truth with, it's the truth with portrait painting, is not to look for all the subtleties right off the bat, but look for the main areas of character, and then eventually get into some of those nuances. Bring it here. I don't see it, but it feels like it's starting to go that direction. And then I'm going to bring it back. And I don't see it, but it feels like it's going that direction. Okay, so trying to move this piece. Now, some of the warm underpainting came through, and I don't mind it at all. I just got lucky with that. Doesn't always happen. Okay, let's go back and see if we can start to make some sense out of this. Kind of, we'll move our way down. Okay, let's go to the top first, up here, and we're gonna. I don't want to put those. Maybe I do. Let me look at them. Okay, there's some dark. You can almost use the watercolor with a little bit more ochre into it. Let's see what happens. Oh, it's way too dark. Just poked a hole in those mountains. You don't want to do that.
So Laurel would like to know, what was your idea for enhancing the vista in your initial thinking?
Handling value and color. So I changed the colors quite a bit. Made it cooler, more towards the sky as we move back, and warmer as we went forward. And I'm going to be putting most of my interesting color up in here. These are all going to be kind of soft variations as we in the background. The other thing is not to look at the detail too much. There's a ton of, this photograph is a super photograph in terms of, and I just shot it, I think, with my camera, because I was painting on location. So I didn't have, I usually have my camera, good camera with me, but I think I shot this with my, yeah, but it's really detailed. This is what happens. You have a real good phone camera, I guess. It is really, it's got too much detail. And it's super easy to get hung up in all that ultra detail. So I'm putting the textural side of it in a little bit right now, not much. Whoops, that's too dark. So it's too dark. See, I already have a color down there. So if I push that color back in, now as I stand back, that to me does kind of what I want it to. I'm going to switch over to this brush just for a second. I'm going to go with blue. I'm going to go with white and a little bit of asphaltum, but keep it on a little more on the blue side, light. And we want to get those kind of cliffs. Might be actually better to almost do it with a knife. So we're doing whatever variations that I can see back in here. And about the, whoops, that's way too light. Okay, let's leave that alone and not go any further with it right now. Not that I couldn't or shouldn't. It's that if I do, that area is going to be wonderful and the rest of the area is probably going to really suck. So, because it's not going to be as refined. So now we're going to move to this little hill, and there's a little piece of architecture up there. And it's right there. So I use the flat, you notice. Look at that. Flat does architecture for you. Another little piece of architecture right about here. And some trees. And for the trees, I'll go back to my goofy brush. I don't want them to be as controlled, as the architecture is much more controlled. Think about it. Okay, so I've got a little bit of that. Now, I'm going to take a knife. That's what I want to do, is I want to get a little highlightation on that. So I'm going to start with Naples. And a little ultramarine into that Naples. Maybe some white to lighten it up just a little bit. Let's see what happens with this, if I can make it work. We want to come from about here. Bring it down. I'm going to probably pronounce that more than I needed to, but since it's not a studio painting, I'm not going to sit and worry about it and go back into it. As it moves over here, I actually just added more ochre and more blue to it, and we're going to pull a little bit of top of the mountain. There's a tree right there too. Maybe I can get a little bit of a, don't like doing that. Let's try it again. That's a little better. Not a lot better, just a little better. Sometimes that's all you get. You want it to be a lot better, but now it bothers me a little bit that it's so pronounced right in here. So I'm just gonna take a brush and kind of diffuse it. Okay. Let's get I'm making a little bit more of a violet. There we go. A little bit, just to get a little bit of that in there. Bring some of these colors together. We get this nice and deep area right in here. Get a little more ultramarine into that. So it goes down, it gets just a little bit darker right in here. And then we'll kind of scuff a little color into that. I want to vary it, so I added some added some brown. And I see something, or as it moves to the left, I added some blue. And we'll try and, nope, more. It's too light. Too light. That white keeps coming out of my brush. That's better. This is what I call I chew it up. The activity of trees without painting the trees, just the activity. That's really what you see. And then we get a little bit of a strong tree line right at the top.
John Conrad wants to know if you ever wipe an area with a rag and start
If
over.
I what?
If you ever wipe an area with a rag and start over.
Oh yeah. Yep. More in studio paintings than in plein air. And that's due to time. That's literally due to time. You know, you got to be careful with your time. Well, I do in these instances, because we're trying to work for this 90-minute deal here. So I've just got to stand back for a second. That's not bad. Better than I thought. And we get a little bit of these raking shadows back in there, and there's a lot of blue in it. And then there's trees, a little bit. When there is a cast shadow, it tends to be angling that way. Let's put a little bit more activity, tree type activity back in there. So as I stand back here, it feels okay. Feels like it's starting to work. Now I can see as it moves down right in here, it's a lot more brown in some of those areas. That's actually not a bad color. It's a little bit darker than I need to be, but between the brown, it flirts back in these kind of weird gray areas. And so you want to keep it cool. You want to keep it warm. And you don't want to overpronounce it any one way. I think I'm going to need to really go in there a little bit with a knife to really get it to work. Come on. A little bit more light. There we go. Comes down low and gets a little cooler. Looking at our time. Okay, it's a really nice white area. So I'm going to take white and Naples because it is kind of yellow. And it's these cliffs back on this hill. Back right there. If I go too far, I'll just come over it again. All right, now I need to lighten that edge up just a little bit. So I'm going to take that same color, move it back into the lighter areas. And we're gonna, that's pretty good. It's kind of almost what I wanted. Shocks me when that happens. So there's a lot of activity and there's a lot of very super subtle value changes. And so you have to be true to them. Now, I made that too dark, which is okay, because that gives me the opportunity to lighten it up. Step back. Still don't like that separation in there. Separation meaning this hill against that hill. And it just means I probably have to add a little bit more light on the edge because the light is coming from there. Okay, got to keep that in mind. That's always, that hasn't changed. So I'm going to add some darks back in here. And the darks look pretty blue, but not pure blue. probably going to start getting a little thicker in a little bit too. Standing back, value-wise, things are starting to shape up. Could add a lot more light in here, but I'm going to add that with a knife, and not right now. And we're going to go over in here and add just a little shimmer of light back, kind of hitting on some trees. For that, I just threw some green into some of these colors I was using. The green is the sap. Just a little bit here and there. And blue, the green and the brown together. So I went a little darker, but I still wanted to feel some of these trees out in here. Okay. Stood back for a second. I'm going to try and get some of the small activity going on back in here. There's some small trees. It's a little bit greener than I needed. There's a little house back in there too, and I may get that in, and then again, I may not. A little piece of architecture right here. But I want to get the nice big tree. It kind of comes in front of it. For that, I want that to be nice and dark and a lot of blue in it. Blue being ultramarine blue. There's a tree, get it up a little higher, a little wider. That comes from here. And then we have some little in the background, nowhere near as dark. A few back in there. So light kind of sneaking its way down in there. Okay, separating that tree. So we're starting to I'm starting to feel some dimension finally. And that's what's happening. The dimension will arise out of it. It's not gonna, you don't start with incredible dimension. You build dimension into it. Dimension meaning the feeling of form. Take that little plane that I hit earlier. I'm going to amplify it, strengthen it, basically lighten it, and add a little color to it. Okay. So this is a real busy photo. Trying to find the right word. And so that I'm trying to keep a freshness, trying to give the character of the busyness without the overwork of the pickiness. And that's not necessarily easy. Part of it is just to keep moving. Just keep moving throughout. Don't sit and admire something you've done just because you think, geez, I did pretty good there, man. Now, if you're in a studio situation, hell, do that all you want. You know, you're not fighting the clock. But if you're in a plein air situation, you are fighting the clock.
So do you try to replicate the shapes that you see, or are you satisfied with it being close and inventive?
I'm sorry. I didn't get any of that.
Okay. Do you try to replicate the shapes or you see, or are you satisfied with it being close and inventive?
Second, I'm satisfied being close and inventive. I want it to feel, in other words, I don't want it to look different. I'm not trying to change it radically. You know, I'm trying to keep true to the image that's in front of me, but be open to moving things around if need be. Because design-wise, sometimes you need to move things. You can't, they just don't work. So design, that may be a factor. Okay, we're getting that. So let's get that little piece of architecture in there. So we got about 30 minutes left here. And you know, how do I feel? I feel a little bit like I'm a little behind, but not. On the Venice painting I did a couple weeks ago, I felt like I was way behind. This, I feel a little behind, but nowhere near like I did back then. So we want to come in right here. Straight up right there. Yeah, I'll be darned. So there's the blue shadow of that building. The rooftop is warmer and it's lighter. So we want to get that in. So I'm going to use a little bit of alizarin, some white, throw some ochre into it because I don't want it to be too pure of a color. This might work. I think it's a little too colorful, but let's give it a shot here. Yeah, I can live with it. All right. And there's a dark under the awning. So we'll go with a okay. Then let's get the front of that building. Clean that brush. Front is going to be white and Naples. It's going to be like that. Okay. So now we got the form. There's a tree in front of it. Got to get that tree in there. That tree covers this down, a little brown into that green that I was using because it's a little bit too raw. There we go. And that's a tree also. Okay. And put a little, because we've amplified that, I have to put a little bit of light on a couple of the trees near it. Throw a little more ochre into it if it's feeling a little too raw of a green. Okay. Keep moving, keep moving. Don't get too satisfied. You know, I always say, well, that looks about right. But I find it better if I trust myself. I recommend this for you guys to trust yourself a little bit. You know, if it works, great, but there's probably still a lot more that can be done to it. So, you know, there's a couple little smokestacks up there. There's some windows. Haven't put windows in. So I have my little small brush here. Maybe put a couple windows in. I count 3 of them. So we'll put 1, 2, 3. 1 down below. So now, there we got detail. We went from a blank slate to a little bit of detail, a little bit there, and a little bit of light on the one, whoops, 2. I'll put a little light on that, chip that down. And they have shadows. Little touches like that make a huge difference. It's cast shadow, or cast shadow. Okay.
Well, I would like to know, when you do your planar work, do you do any thumbnails or just jump in?
Both.
Mostly jump in.
Well, if on the 3-day or 2 and 3-day, yeah, I recommend it. On the ones that I just go out, I don't often. I don't. I think it's great. But usually when I get out there and I like a vista or a venue that much, if I do a thumbnail, it's quick. It's quick. And it's all for composition and placement. Now, I don't know if I'm going to put any other architecture in there. I kind of like the idea of that being the star, you know? Okay, let's get enough of these other trees in. And we got some light piercing in. We got some light up here. Let's get that in real quick. So we're going to warm up one of my colors here. Don't have to go too light because it's a pretty dark color up there. Bring a little more brown into it, a little bit more white, and maybe a little orange. It's right about here. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Pretty good color, pretty good value.
The only problem is your shoulder goes in front of it, and then.
Yeah, well, I'm going to block. If I block you guys, it's just what happens with anatomy. Now we get a little bit of light on some of the trees as they kind of work their way down from there, but not a lot. Oops, it's a little too much. I don't want it to be the light on the trees to be anywhere near as light as this, but we want a little bit of here and here. And there's a plane right about here. And then we've got the lighter plane, which I'm going to indicate first with this. So if I'm wrong, I can fix it. I'd rather be too dark in the beginning anyway. And then we got these light cliffs back there. And usually I've been using my the knife for that. So let's see what happens when I just use a brush. Okay, keep moving. Keep moving. Get some more trees. Where are we at here? I got about 20 minutes, so I'm getting a little panicky now. Falling a little further behind than I wanted to. So let's get this light plane. Get some more light. Some of these trees here. We want to get the light in, and then I want to put some trees, some darker tree shapes back on top of it. So I took some Prussian. No, that's way too much Prussian. And some asphaltum. Should have never used so much Prussian. Prussian is like a phthalo, you guys, and it can totally overpower something. I mean, where it's really, it becomes so dominant that
really hard.
any other image that you've got,
There you go.
I knew I was going to cover
Yeah.
as I got over here. There's just nothing I can do about that. The bulk of the trees. So we're painting activity at this point. We're letting one area overlap over another. It's the overlapping that creates the dimension. There's a lot of ways to create dimension. Think about it. There's value control. Darker in the foreground, lighter in the background. There's warm to cool, warmer as it comes closer, cooler as it gets further away. There is overlapping. There's linear perspective, meaning a picket fence or a river goes back in space, that's linear perspective. So you want to be able to use them all. They're all at your disposal. Use them. Okay. Now there's some light peeking through back in there. We want to get some of that light. And first place I see it is right about in here. And what I can do is take this, pronounce it up, then we'll bring some trunks back over that. See it here, here, here. Okay, and then what you do is brush. Okay, and find it. I drew with it in the beginning, and there it is. Okay, so we're going to put some tree trunks. A couple of cast shadows. You don't want them too regular, but what that does is it brings them out in front. And then the same thing is going to happen all over. It's going to happen here, here, boom. Here. Okay, let's bring a few more down in here. I want to get some of these shadows going back. to help ground them. Okay, so we got to move forward because I'm running out of time. I don't think I'm going to put that architecture in there. I think what I can do instead is add some lighter trees back behind. Right about here. I kind of like the idea of that being the only piece of architecture anyway. I brought that up earlier. There is another little house back in here. If you really wanted to get crazy, you could get into that. But in a studio painting, I might, because you have time to think about whether that's going to, right now I'm making split-second decisions, which is more of the plein air approach. But on a studio painting, you don't have to make those split-second decisions. So the other thing that I talked about in terms of creating dimension is scale. Big things up front, smaller things in the back. So if you think, let's just talk paint. Let's talk paint, not necessarily subject. So you put smaller strokes back behind and bigger strokes up front. All right, that's more or less of an abstract way of thinking of it, but that's basically it. You put the smaller strokes back behind and the bigger strokes up front. Now, if you want to call attention to something and you want something to be more of a focal point, maybe even way in the background, you want something to stand out a little bit more, then you slow down a little bit and you don't use bigger strokes, you use more control and more modeling. It's all this dry brush, varied colors. So I'm trying to vary my color and not be the same color everywhere. It's pretty hard as I'm adding a little bit of an edge light here and there to some of this. Brought a little bit of orange back into this foreground. Value-wise, it's okay. I probably could add one more layer and go just a touch lighter. I don't know if I'm going to have time. Like this. Okay, now let's get the ground plane a little bit lighter. I didn't paint it as light as I wanted to on purpose. I think I'm going to use my knife. See what I can get out of that. I've got to add some solvent-free gel to it so it really flows. Very, very white. A little bit of asphaltum into it, and I already have a little bit of Naples into it. I think that's about right. Let's see what happens with this. What do you say? Come on. One's sticking. There we go. Probably a little lighter than I want, so I'm going to throw a little bit more asphaltum into it. I want it to jump, but that's hurt my eyes. Boy, that is actually bringing it to life. my thinking, my planning was pretty good. My execution's not as good as my planning, but that I'm going to blame that on time.
Laurel has a nice suggestion that be interesting to hear you evaluate how you feel you've improved the look of the vista when you're finishing.
I've improved
up.
what?
That you've improved the look of the vista when you're finishing up.
Okay. Okay. I'll tell you what I think this light is helping tremendous amount. Probably, and really that's because it's a matter of setting it up properly. And probably I talk about this more in class, and I don't talk about it as much here, but so much of your painting is literally just about setting up for what's going to come on top of it. And if you set it up and you set up maybe enough stages, chances are what you're really going to make it work when you bring your final strokes into it. I'm standing back about 10 feet.
Can you talk about why you switched to palette knife?
Time. I'm faster.
With the palette knife.
And textures. I can get some more interesting textures with it. That's why. And sometimes, to answer that question in many ways, sometimes I don't even know why. In this case, I did. It had to do with textures and it had to do with time. But if I hadn't set that up with that color underneath, this wouldn't be working. This kind of putty colors, for lack of a better way of describing it.
Unfortunately, they can't see you.
Huh?
They can't see your strokes.
Sorry about that, you guys. Not much I can do about it. I'm useless left-handed, so I can't switch to my left hand here. I'll lay this in as quickly as I can so we can get into the other areas.
So you want some of the underneath coming through.
Yeah, absolutely. I want some because that's what gives the texture. Almost used up all that paint I mixed up.
So your setup is usually more mid-tone, so you can hit
Yes.
lights and dark accents.
Yes, beautifully. You picked at it. I work everything almost exclusively. I don't know whether I'm painting figures, landscapes, out of the midtones. Never. I save my lightest lights, my darkest darks, to the end. You know, I may put a dark accent in there so I know how dark I need to be. But generally speaking, that happens more at the end of my paintings than it does at any other stage. We're going to put a little bit of a rock here. Get this looking a little bit more like foliage. It's a little bit greener. Now, I haven't hit the yellow, but I can take Naples and yellow. Kind of do the same thing here. So one of the things that I've done here you may have already figured it out, is I amplified the colors in the foreground, meaning strengthened them. All right. Colors in the background I kept much more muted. Let's get a little bit of this.
1:30, just to let you know.
What was that?
It's 1:30, just to let you know.
Yep, I'm going an extra 5. So the last 5 minutes, going 95. Sorry about that. It's a busy painting. And get a little bit color variation in the water.
So a couple of questions. Once you stop in this demonstration, how do you save your palette's color mix?
I don't. I literally clean them off, start afresh.
Is your focal area the foreground or midground?
Focal area is probably this little piece of architecture. It's the only piece in the painting where there is really clear-cut form. The foreground hopefully leads you into the rest of the painting. That's generally you don't want your focal point ever to be in the foreground, because what happens is, if you think about it, the whole idea of a focal point is that's where you want to stop people's attention. You don't want to stop people's attention right at the beginning of the painting. You want people to be able to kind of, a friend of mine a neighbor of mine used to say, I like a painting I feel like I can walk back into. I thought an interesting way of, I've never heard anybody put it that way, but it's a very interesting way of putting it. You feel like you can actually go back into. So we're pretty close to what I would call done. I can see a lot of little nuances. I know I said I would probably come in one time, so I'm going an extra 5. I've got about 2 more minutes in on some of these cliffs. A palette knife will allow you to make different kinds of marks. A brush generally is a more controlled way of making marks for me. Now, I know people that are palette knife painters. That's all they paint with. I don't like to limit myself to anything, whether it be just a palette knife, just a brush, anything. Whatever will get the job done. That's probably the old illustrator in me. But I also want it to feel like paint. And that's the other side of it. I want it to feel like it's paint, and it's not, I'm not just rendering an eyeball. I'm not just rendering a tree. I want it to feel like a tree, but I want, when an individual has the opportunity to see a painting in person, I want them to see the way I painted it, kind of be a participant in that side of it. Well, it was a fun challenge. I always like to push myself sometimes. Sometimes I need to just chill out and do something simple. Maybe we'll do something simple next week. Maybe like I have an image of a doorway, and I can really start to play with textures and paint textures. So maybe next week, I haven't decided for sure what I'm going to do. I never decide till, unfortunately, the last minute. And which is a little bit true today.
Do you ever go back and glaze over areas to get them to recede?
To get them what?
To recede?
No. I don't. What I will do is, if I'm going to glaze, I'm just going to glaze a whole area, and then I'll go back and rework whatever I feel needs to be reworked. Generally, I'm not a glazer. I will glaze occasionally, but basically, no, I'm a la prima painter, meaning I try and paint it all as, so even if it is all, even on a studio painting, if it all isn't done at once, my approach is the same as if I were painting it in one setting. It's okay. Last thing I should do, and then I'm just going to pick up a little bit more of this yellow and let it kind of split its way back here, over here, up behind, and then right in front of all that. I like the paint texture that's happening as I use towards the end here, because I'm getting a much thicker feel of paint, which I wanted. I would like actually the whole damn painting to have a little bit more of that. So evaluation wise, if I'm to evaluate it, it's effective. My feeling is, as I stand back, it's effective. There's parts I don't like I think up in here, I've started to almost overwork it. And when that happens, you just pick up an old big brush and just kind of smear it a little bit. And you get away from that overworked look. I like the textures. I like the focal point. I think I could brighten that one more time. I think I could amplify this, work a little bit more in some of the negative spaces and the tree shape here and there that would come out. But overall, it works. You know, it works as good as I can do in this amount of time. So I am going to wave goodbye and thank you all for putting up with the last 5 minutes. Hopefully you got something out of it. I see pros and cons. I may do some touch up on it. I usually do, but all in all, it's done. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.